Hello everyone, and welcome to my Forged in the Barrens complete set review. I'm really excited for Forged in the Barrens, in large part because not only does the set itself look cool, but it's going to be sort of the biggest shift in the metagame that Hearthstone's really ever seen because of the timing of the release of the set and the core set as well. So in a lot of cases, doing set reviews, it's like, okay, well, what are these cards gonna, impact the metagame, yada yada yada, and you sometimes like, okay, well, what decks already exist? And right now, with the shift of the core set and the big rotation, it's really wide open, right? I think that we're gonna see, the like I said, the biggest shift in the metagame that we've really ever seen. Perhaps since the introduction of the Wild format and the huge shakeup that happened then, or perhaps even ever. So definitely a really exciting time to be a Hearthstone player. So let's jump right in. And as usual, we're going to start class by class, starting with Demon Hunter. Our first Demon Hunter card is Sigil of Flame. Sigils are a new class of cards, essentially, being introduced for Demon Hunter. There's a couple of them in the set that are an effect that happens at the start of your next turn. So this is 2 cost. At the start of your next turn, deal 3 damage to all minions. So this is obviously very cheap for a mass removal effect. 3 damage to all minions for 2, but it doesn't happen until the start of your next turn. So your opponent gets a chance to set up to play around it. Maybe they don't play additional minions. Maybe they have some sort of health buffs to give to your minions, or rather give to their own minions. And, it sort of puts you in like an interesting spot where it's because it is telegraphed, like, say, a Doomsayer, your opponent can, do what they can to play around it. But at the same time, unlike a Doomsayer, they can't, like, stop it, right? This isn't like, something they can silence, something they can kill. They just know it's coming and it's going to happen. I think this is a really interesting and likely actually pretty powerful card. 2 mana is not that much to be, so you can play this in the early game. Like, even just playing this on turn 2, right? This answers the things that they have already in play, potentially, and stops them from developing further. Like I said, kind of like a Doomsayer. So this effect, despite the fact that it's telegraphed to your opponent and they have the opportunity potentially to buff their stuff, can still be extremely effective, especially because Demon Hunter has, their hero power. They have a lot of natural ways to clear up things on the board if your opponent happens to buff some small things out of range of this. So I think this is actually quite a powerful card for a controlling or mid-range style of Demon Hunter deck. That said, we haven't really seen that many decks of that kind in Demon Hunter be successful. But there's obviously, again, a huge shakeup that's happening in the metagame, as well as some tools that Demon Hunter has in the new set that potentially push them in the direction of wanting to be, more controlling, more sort of mid-range rather than all-out aggressive. So I do think that this is a pretty appealing card. The fact that not only do you kind of answer multiple turns worth of development for your opponent, and you also get full mana on the turn that it goes off to redeploy and get ahead of your opponent on the board. Unlike most AoE effects, right? Most AoE effects, you spend a bunch of mana to kill the board, your opponent gets to reload. With this, yes, your opponent has the opportunity to play around it, but you get the full mana on your turn where the Sigil actually goes off and AoEs the board to then build up your own board in response. So I think this is a really interesting card, and I do expect it to be a card that does see some play in mid-range / controlling Demon Hunter decks if those style of decks exist. But I think this might be a reason that they can. Next up, we have Razorfen Beastmaster. Now, this is one of the new Death Rattle synergy cards that's being introduced for Demon Hunter. And it's a little bit weird, right? Like, we didn't see any Death Rattle stuff for Demon Hunter whatsoever going into this set. And it's kind of been introduced kind of large scale as a new Demon Hunter mechanic. These specifically are, there's several cards that are actually seemingly quite powerful. If you look at this, Death Rattle, summon a Death Rattle that costs 4 or less from your hand. That's a pretty powerful effect, right? You're essentially having the ability to help chain Death Rattle into another Death Rattle, and then obviously additional Death Rattle synergy stuff that exists. We'll get to some of the later cards. There's a lot of cards in this set that are devoted to the Death Rattle theme for Demon Hunter, which I think is necessary if you want it to actually possibly be a viable archetype, a viable strategy. It does mean that sort of the other kind of directions of Demon Hunter don't get quite as much attention. There are, of course, at least some of the new cards in the core set that can support those other sort of archetypes and strategies. But it does feel a little bit strange to me that this is like kind of out of nowhere, new Demon Hunter thing. Obviously, Demon Hunter's a new class. Haven't really fully explored all the stuff you might want Demon Hunter to do. But like, okay, there's already these other classes that have death rattle synergies. What way does Demon Hunter do it differently? And it feels like rather than being like trigger your death rattles like Hunter was doing, it's more like death rattles that like get more death rattles or things like that. Kind of more of a like sort of value / tempo chain that sort of rely on one another rather than like big death rattle like synergy push things like Play Dead or Carnivorous Cube style stuff. So I think that like obviously the ability of any of these to be successful is pretty contingent on all the other ones. So hard to really evaluate this huge bulk of stuff at once, but it also obviously is contingent on the other death rattles in the environment. And there are a lot of powerful death rattles that were introduced, even just in the core set, or death rattle synergy type stuff. There's Nerubian Egg, there's Baron Rivendare. So there are definitely a lot of kind of supporting cast around this that may not necessarily have existed in the previous metagame that are important to keep in mind when you're trying to evaluate and potentially build a death rattle Demon Hunter deck in the new format. So let's take a look at some more of them, like this guy, Razorbore. 2 cost 2/2, death rattle, summon a death rattle. It costs 3 or less. So obviously, this and the Razorfen fellow that we just looked at, they got some synergy, right? You got the 2 that plays the 3, you got the 3 that summons the 4, kind of going up the chain. That sort of being their sort of theme, in terms of the way that they interact with death rattle. It kind of, feeds upon one another. I don't really necessarily get the like Demon Hunter feel of that, from a thematic standpoint, but like pretty clearly has like a different feel to it than the other classes that have sort of utilized death rattle synergies. And then, of course, these are not the only death rattle support in the set. There's also this Tusk Piercer. Now, this obviously goes a bit more toward what we have seen for more typical support for Demon Hunter. The weapons that you want to attack, right? And this, obviously, a weapon kind of naturally has, death rattle. You just attack with this twice, you get your death rattle minion. And this can sort of feed the chain I was just talking about. You can play the Tusk Piercer on 1, and then that gets you the Razorfen Boar or whatever on 2, which dies and puts the other guy into play on 3, and then kind of, again, goes sort of up that death rattle chain. So there's sort of a pretty clear progression to what these are building toward. And then, of course, there's additional tools to sort of fuel that chain in the form of this fellow, Vengeful Spirit. A 4-cost 4/4 with Outcast, draw 2 Death Rattle minions. A lot of Death Rattle style decks, historically, if we're talking about stuff like Death Rattle Hunter, for instance, one of the sort of most prominent Death Rattle style decks, like the Cathrena Winter Wisp Death Rattle Hunter decks, that were like Play Dead type decks, they tend to be big stuff that's situational, which in a more sort of traditional death rattle sort of style, that sort of style, Outcast actually feels like the sort of thing that's hard to use, right? Because Outcast really wants your deck to be full of inexpensive stuff that you can play whenever in order to position your stuff properly. That said, the nature of the death rattles in the Demon Hunter death rattle pool are things that kind of naturally empty your hand, because so far the death rattles that we've seen are death rattles that put other death rattles into play. And then that if you're kind of emptying your hand and planning toward that, you can then, get the Vengeful Spirit into position to play your Vengeful Spirit, reload your hand to keep that sort of chain going. So that really kind of feels to me like the direction where the Vengeful Spirit sort of fits into this. Like, okay, well, you want to keep this, my guy dies, puts another guy into play, chain going. And in order to do so, you obviously need some form of card draw, and there's that in the Vengeful Spirit. And then, of course, there is kind of the big daddy of the whole chain, which is not part of the kind of draw and keep putting death rattles into play itself, but is just sort of the big payoff to, I'm playing a death rattle hunter or death rattle demon hunter deck. It's Death Speaker Blackthorne. 7-cost 3/6 death rattle. Summon 3 death rattle minions that cost 5 or less from your deck. So this is just like an outrageous amount of stats and mana's worth for 7 mana, right? Like this is putting 15 mana worth of death rattles, theoretically, of course, because if you have all these smaller things in your deck that they can possibly, you know, kind of clog up this and give you weaker things. But then there's a bunch of things that like would put other things into play. So this feels like it's just going to give you a lot of stuff. It's really difficult for anyone to ever like kind of clear your board of these death rattles if you have the death rattles that summon other death rattles, and then you have the, you know, draw more death rattles, and then this guy kind of put a bunch of other death rattles into play. So obviously the power level of a lot of this is contingent on what other death rattles exist outside of just necessarily the Demon Hunter ones, because these are more like glue, right? These are kind of like your engine that enables whatever the other death rattles are, rather than kind of being like a big payoff in itself. This is obviously a payoff, but what the payoff you get from this is contingent on what those death rattles are, right? So, you know, I do feel like this kind of has kind of a modular component to it. This isn't just like, okay, well, you just play all these together and that's your deck, right? But you play these together and it's like, well, do you want to be more aggressive, right? Do you want to play like death rattle stuff that, you know, is like cheap and aggressive and does damage to your opponent? Do you want to play like more defensively? You can play like the Rotten Apple Bomb-ish style death rattles. There was one that was revealed during the final reveal stream. I forget the name of it, but like a taunt that restored health when it dies. But then there's also like an overstated guy who does damage to you when it dies. And while you can have like a little of column A, a little from column B to like, you know, have this powerful tempo and then restore your health when that guy dies, and because he's gonna, you know, hurt you or whatever. You could also like be like more focused on, I'm a beatdown deck, I'm a control deck, and I'm using the specific death rattles that help support either of those directions. So I do like the fact that this package feels like it can go either way. It feels like it wants to be like kind of mid-rangey to me, because it's clearly not like ultra aggressive. But you can clearly take it in a couple of different directions. And again, as I was saying, I think all of this is really contingent on how good are the death rattles that you're able to get and use with these, rather than how powerful these themselves. I feel like they can kind of, you know, support a lot of different stuff, and feels like a direction that's worth experimenting with at least. All right, so moving away from the death rattle package a little bit, there is another sigil, Sigil of Silence. A 0-cost sigil. At the start of your next turn, silence all enemy minions. And this, I feel like, is much less appealing than the AoE one. Obviously, in certain matchups, this could be pretty effective. You know, if you're playing against, you know, decks that like use a lot of various buffs, whatever. But in a lot of cases, if you're playing against a lot of buffs, they're just gonna kill you with those buffs. If they have a bunch of taunts, well, you could play Kain currently. I don't believe Kain rotates. I think that's one of the cards that stays in the core set. And you can, or at least it was in Ashes. I don't remember which, but I think Kain sticks around. I don't remember which one it is, but I'm pretty sure it sticks around. I think he was in Ashes. But this kind of feels like, okay, if you're trying to use it against taunts, it feels more like, okay, you'd rather use Kain. This kind of like sets up weirdly. It does mean that like there's nothing you play this and your opponent can't like answer it, right? Like it's not like once this has been played, your opponent can like, okay, well now I'm gonna, like if you play a Kain, they can kill your Kain, right? But you get like a full turn where you know they can't taunt because of the sigil. But at the same time, like they know it's coming, so they can make different decisions, right? It's in a lot of cases you're like, well, should I heal myself? Should I play a taunt? I don't know what they have. You know what they have. This is like sitting out there. It's gonna come and silence your entire board. It is worth noting that the Consume Magic, I think that's the name of it, the 1-cost Outcast card, that did go away, right? That was one of the cards that is not included in the core set. So the easy access to silence that Demon Hunter had previously had is no longer available. So this might be, one of the best silence options that they have, period, anyway. So that kind of changes the evaluation of the card a little bit. And obviously, anything that costs 0 is something you need to pay attention to. Maybe there's some weird, Gadget and Auctioneer deck, right? That you want to kind of combo off with cheap spells. This being obviously, a potentially powerful one of them. If you're trying to set up for some big burst combo, this could be something you play as part of your like kind of chain card draw turn that also sets you up to be able to burst kill your opponent because you silenced all their stuff and they have no taunts. And well, you're Demon Hunter. Because like one of the things about Demon Hunter 2, unlike a lot of other classes, you don't need stuff in play to threaten your opponent for, not having taunts, right? Like this can set up, like a inner demon type turn, right? This could set up like a big burst damage turn. A lot of the big burst damage cards, like Twin Slice, Twin Slice is gone, right? So there's no more like Twin Slice, generate Twin Slice off of Wand Maker, Twin Slice, explode you. But you know, there is the possibility of, again, still like big burst damage coming out of Demon Hunter just from the face, even if you don't have a board. So that is something that's also worth considering when evaluating this card, which again, I don't feel like is likely to be kind of omnipresent like Consume Magic was. A big part of that was the fact that you just outcast, draw a card, and cycle it in matchups where it wasn't good. And obviously has an effect right away, whereas this you kind of need to wait for. So next up we have Vile Call. 3-cost spell, summon 2/2/2 demons with lifesteal. I'm kind of torn on this. I do think that lifesteal is actually pretty pretty underrated. Frequently you see people look at this like, you know, a 3-cost make 2/2/2s is pretty bad, right? But 2/2/2s with lifesteal can actually be relatively effective. Because even if your opponent has to trade into them, that gains you a decent amount of life. I don't think this is likely to be a particularly powerful card. That said, but I do think that it's better than if you just look at it in the surface where it's like, oh, you just make, you know, 2/2/2s. It's like the life steal is actually pretty relevant, especially for, you know, class that uses its life totals aggressively as Demon Hunter can. You know, and with a lot of the kind of easy life gain from Demon Hunter in the form of like, you know, Eldrazi Warglades plus, not that Eldrazi's going, Eldrazi's still part of the core set, but plus like big twin slices, you might need to try and find ways to get, you know, lifesteal where you can get it. I don't think this is going to end up being like a tool of like an Il'gynoth deck, right? Because you know the Il'gynoth decks typically want to like, you know, be like one big burst turn, at least the ones that we've seen right now. But you know, maybe this is something that's like kind of like a stopgap that helps with your early game because there's no more like Blade Dance for Demon Hunter. Maybe you need more ways to kind of absorb damage and regain a little bit of health in the middle turns against minion based decks. I don't know. This is one of the Demon Hunter cards that I've seen that are kind of like, doesn't really feel like it's likely to have a home. Not like there's Demon Hunter decks that like care about having demons in play outside of like the things that synergize with like the big demons. This is kind of in the middle somewhere. It doesn't really necessarily feel like it has a home. And next up we have the Mercenary for Demon Hunter, the legendary minion Kurtrus Ashfallen, a 4-cost 3/4. Battlecry, attack the left and rightmost enemy minions with Outcast immune this turn. So obviously, you know, if you trigger the Outcast on this, it's pretty powerful. You're getting a 3/4 that attacks 2 minions immediately in any kind of like mid-range or aggressive creature matchup. Could be super strong. Not a particularly powerful card, obviously against like control or combo. It's pretty weak, obviously. But it's this feels like it's much more of like, you know, something that you want to have decent answers, value answers to opposing minion strategies. This is really good against, you know, an opposing minion deck. It is a little bit interesting in terms of like how it influences your opponent's board positioning, right? Like typically you don't really worry too much, at least currently against Demon Hunter, about like, okay, where do I put my stuff? But like wanting to put like, you know, your big stuff on the outside, so your opponent can't just like Kurtrus it or whatever, especially, you know, depending on the sort of the game state. It's also just not even an obvious thing, right? Like with Meteor, it's obvious, right? It's like, okay, well, you always want to have, you know, a small thing between your big things, so they can't just like, you know, Meteor and kill, big thing in the middle, 2 small things in the left and right. With this, it's like, okay, well, based on what sort of removal my opponent's likely to have in addition to a Kurtrus, do I want to just have small things on the outside so my opponent's Kurtrus will kill those and not damage my big thing? Or do I want to keep my big things on the outside so they can't kill them at all? Because there's a lot more to it, right? It's not like obvious exactly how you want to play against it, because it's much more contingent on game state and what else is going on rather than kind of a hard and fast rule. So I think it's a neat card. Again, I feel like it's something that feels like it has a home in like mid-range Demon Hunter, which isn't something we've seen a ton of, but maybe something that has, you know, a bit more of a resurgence with sort of the shift of cards that with what's coming in and out of the core set, as well as some of the new stuff. Maybe it goes in the Death Rattle versions, you know? And lastly, we have one of the ranked cards, the Demon Hunter version, of Fury. 1-cost spell, give your hero +2 attack this turn, and then upgrades when you have 5 mana, and then upgrades again when you have 10 mana. So rank 1, 1-cost, +2 attack. Rank 2 at 5 mana, it's +3 attack. And rank 3 at 10 mana, it's +4 attack. This is, I think, kind of a unimpressive card in my mind, especially when you compare it with some of the previous stuff that we have seen for Demon Hunter, like Twin Slice. Twin Slice was clearly pretty outrageously powerful and had a lot of, you know, potential. Like it was essentially +4 for one card, like this is once you get to 10 mana, but it obviously, you know, was modal and required 2 mana to split it up over turns. So I think this is like, maybe there's, a desire to have additional stuff that pushes your attack now that Twin Slice is no longer around. If you are looking to play stuff like Bladed Lady, we're no longer supporting Blade Dance, so that's not really something that we're worried about. But, maybe you're just playing a deck that's like looking to be like a big combo kill late in the game, and just 1 mana, 4 damage, that's a lot, right? I don't feel like this is a card that will just be played for general utility purposes in quite the same way that Twin Slice was, because I think that it's, pretty unimpressive in the early turns of the game. It's like, okay, 1 mana for 3 damage is actually pretty good once you get to 5 mana. But the jump, if the jump was a little bit bigger, say it was like, 2, 4, 6 or 2, 3, 6 or something, maybe that ends up being too much, But this isn't necessarily a card that we want to be super powerful too, right? Because it's literally just, this is just more damage that you're outputting. Every time you play something like this. So I'm not like super impressed by this card. Again, I do feel like maybe there's like some sort of like burst combo thing that you want to do with it, and especially if you are looking for additional ways to increase your attack. Now that Twin Slice is gone, this can be a way to do that, but this is not a card that I expect to be nearly as popular as Twin Slice, and don't think that it has any obvious home. Anyway, that is Demon Hunter. So lots of different stuff in this class than we've generally seen before. So I'm excited to see what different directions that Demon Hunter takes with the cards that have left the format, as well as especially the new Death Rattle stuff, which is something entirely new for the class. And for the next class, we have Druid. Starting off with Druid of the Plains, a 7-cost, 7/6 rush with Frenzy, transformed into a 6/7 Kodo with Taunt. I think this card is actually just very strong. One of the big things about this is, the Frenzy means that it's a transform effect. It isn't, okay, well now it just like gains Taunt or something, right? So this can rush into something, go down to 1 life, and then boom. Now it's a 6/7 taunt. I think this card is extremely strong. Like you are getting removal plus a taunt all in one. It is something that you can like overgrowth, curve into, kill your opponent's thing, defend against their other things. I think this is just like a really, really, really strong card. Frenzy, of course, is whenever this takes damage for the first time. So if you just play this out on the board, and your opponent doesn't have anything, and like say they AOE. They can't string together two like different pieces of damage to kill it too, right? Because the Frenzy effect will mean, like, say you play this, they're like, okay, I'll Flame Strike. And even though Flame Strike now does 5 damage, suddenly this survives as a 6/7 because it transforms into the 6/7 taunt as soon as it takes the damage from Flame Strike. So I just think this is a super, super, super strong card. And, it has synergy with some of the like Druid taunt stuff, which we'll see in a bit, because it does turn into a taunt minion. So yeah, I just think this is like super premium removal and defensive option in any kind of minion-based matchup. Obviously, it's, not particularly powerful against like a, combo deck, but it can be even powerful against control because, as I was mentioning, it can't be killed by a single source of damage or rather by multiple sources of damage. It has to be killed by a single source of damage, or, you literally can't even like ping it and execute it, right? Like if you're playing Warrior, you can't like, there's just no way to get rid of it that isn't just like one shot until it has transformed. So this is just like, I think, such a powerful card that I expect this to see a lot of play and to potentially be like one of the big reasons that Druid decks can be powerful in the new expansion. Next up, we have Thorn Growth Sentries, 2 costs nature spell, summon 2 1/2 turtles with taunt. So this is a bit like the Life Bloom Dryads or whatever the hell it is. The summon 2 1/2 life steals. I forget the name of that card, but regardless, there's a token generator, but it generates tokens that naturally have taunt. One of the things that is really interesting with the shift in the core set and some of the, what is in Druid now, there's no more Savage Roar. Savage Roar was rotated out. So the token strategies have to kind of go in a different direction, right? And being, sort of having these things that can be marginally more defensive to protect either yourself or your other tokens, I think is actually a pretty interesting direction. Compared to just the life stealing stuff that we saw before for a similar cost. Obviously right now one of the strongest decks in Standard is Token Druid, and yes, that you lose a lot of stuff from that, but a lot of the sort of core components outside of course Savage Roar, are still around, right? You still have a lot of powerful tools with, like the Eclipses and Arbor Up, being able to, protect like Gibberling, right? I think Gibberling is still around. No, Spellburst was, yeah, Gibberling's gone. Now I'm trying to like remember where everything is. With so many things, it's kind of hard to remember. It's like, okay, the stuff that was from previous year, there's like some Spellburst cards that are in later sets. I don't really remember exactly, but I think Gibberling is still around. So even just like, imagine just like, like turn 2, Gibberling coin this, right? So now you have your Gibberling that still has the ability protected, right? Well, I was thinking of Twin Spell, and that was going away because that was part of the previous year. Yeah, Spellburst. Spellburst is Skullament, so that does definitely stick around. But yeah, something like turn 2, Gibberling, coin, Thorngrowth Sentries. Now your opponent has to use an actual removal effect on your remaining Gibberling that has Spellburst, or else you could potentially continue to make more Gibberlings turn to turn, because you have it protected by taunts. They can't just like use a weapon or a dagger or whatever and kill it. And like the just simple fact that these tokens have taunt really changes up a way that some of these strategies are going to be able to play out in general. So I think this is just a solid card. The fact that it is a nature card, there's obviously things that interact with nature as well. And I believe the turtles themselves are beasts and they have taunts. So there's a lot of kind of like pieces of the buffalo here for a bunch of different decks that it may find a home in as well. Next up, we have Living Seed, 2-cost spell, draw a beast, reduces cost by 1, upgrades when you have 5 mana. And my guess is that the upgrades are reduces cost by 2, reduces cost by 3. This is, obviously pretty interesting. It's sort of a ramp effect. If you are, going in, looking to ramp out into big things, even just like, being able to use this, draw, say the Druid of the Plains, right? Be able to play your Druid of the Plains on 6 rather than on 7 can be a big deal. Once you get to 5 mana, now you're discounting by 2. I think that any kind of like ramp-ish effect can be very powerful in those sorts of decks. Even though this is not like ramp all your stuff, it is sort of ramp a card. And if you play a deck that uses a specific category and specific range of beasts, you can kind of always know what you're getting, right? Like in like a Guardian Animal style deck, right? If you are playing essentially every beast in your deck is 5 cost or whatever, right? This is draw one of those, and now you can play it in turn 4. And the fact that it is just draw a beast is also pretty relevant. It has potential implications in like combo decks that happen to use beasts. We don't necessarily know that the beasts that may care about that right now, but like this is the sort of thing that's worth keeping in mind. Not only does it draw a specific class of card, but it offers a cost reduction to that class of card. So be able to ensure that you find a specific card in your deck and that you can cast it more easily because of the cost reduction can be really relevant in a bunch of situations. Will this likely be like, some sort of like superstar card right out of the gate? I don't think so, but it is the sort of card that I think it's really worth keeping an eye on. Next up, we have Razorfen Battleguard. 2-cost 2/3. The first taunt minion you play each turn costs 2 less. Speaking of ramp style cards, the fact that this is the first taunt minion you play each turn and it itself does not have taunt is actually pretty relevant. You can play this and then protect it with the taunt in the same turn that you play it. So there's a couple ways to use this, right? You can obviously just play this in turn 2, and then in turn 3, boom, 5-drop taunt, and give your opponent a window to kill it. You can also just play it like on turn 3 or 4 alongside the taunt that you would play on that turn, right? So that is like a pretty relevant thing to keep in mind when you're evaluating a card like this. The fact that it is not its own class of card. It is the fact that, it cares about itself, right? Like it can be essentially be a free card in the right circumstances when you're just like basically ramping out other stuff. So I think this card actually has the potential to be quite good. The fact that it's non-legendary also means you can play 2 of them. You could easily play this turn 3 into Emerald Dragon, right? The corrupt 3/4 taunt. And protect it right away, and then start playing other big taunts. So you just play this on turn 2 next to a Bone Chewer Brawler, right? Like free Bone Chewer Brawler. This can be I ramp out to big taunts, and it can also just be okay. This is just letting me like play out free stuff to get like essentially like as part of like a swarm style strategy, and just not even necessarily ramp out, but just like essentially get like mana discounts to flood the board. So I think this is a very, very strong card. I don't know that necessarily there's the card pool to support building a deck around it right now, but this is the sort of card that breaks formats and breaks metagames because it is giving you this like persistent mana discount that can essentially make itself free. This is the sort of card that you really, really, really need to keep your eye on. This is one of the craziest cards in the entire set. Celestial Alignment. This kind of has Astral Communion vibes, right? 7-cost spell, set each player to 0 mana crystals. Set the cost of cards in all hands and decks to 1. This card is clearly just absolutely wacky and wild. It's the sort of thing that, like, you know, you want to play a ton of expensive stuff, right? And probably like Lightning Blooms, so you can play this, and then in the same turn, well, I guess you can't even play it your Lightning Blooms in the same turn, right? Because they would be set to 1. There's no real way. There's no way to like play more stuff after you play this, right? Because you immediately get set to 0, and you can't unless you have like a way to generate mana on board. Because your like coin costs 1, your innervate costs 1. Because if you bloom first, will it keep you? Because yeah, if you play like the what's the stealth guy who attacks and gives you a mana crystal? That guy's rotating, I believe, though. Or like Twig with this in Wild. But yeah, anyway, this card's sweet. I'm sure this is going to be like a YouTube highlight / crazy Twitch clip style of card. I strongly doubt this is going to be a card that really ends up being, in any kind of legitimately high-level competitive deck. But it's gonna be something that creates some craziness, right? You play this, you play a bunch of not even necessarily like ramp cards, because you don't want to have a bunch of ramp cards after you play this, but you want to ramp to it, and you just have huge stuff, right? Like I said, very similar to Astral Communion, but it's an Astral Communion that like impacts your opponent too. So I'm really curious to see how those games play out, and I'm sure I'm going to be playing in some of them because I will definitely be trying to build a deck with this card. Next up, we have Plaguema the Rotting. 4-cost 3/4. After a friendly minion with taunt dies, summon a new copy of it without taunt. This card's clearly pretty disgusting in terms of like what the best things are to do with it. Unclear. It itself is a pretty poor minion, 4-cost 3/4. But if you have like any like high value, like even if you just like have just like normal minions, right, that die with this, that's really powerful. Just resummon it, doesn't have taunt anymore. But if you specifically have this with like high value stuff, like stuff that has powerful death rattles, say you have this with like Greybow, right? Plaguema Greybow. Your Greybow dies, you summon a new Greybow that doesn't have taunt, but still has a death rattle, and the death rattle from the original Greybow goes in something else. And now you just like make a million Greybows, right? Or with like, if you want to go like ramp up really big, you have like Scrapyard Scavenger, Scrapyard whatever, Colossus, Scrapyard Colossus, that's the name of it. Oh, well, look, I get my thing dies, and now I get a 7/7 taunt from the death rattle, and then another version, a 7/7 that'll then have a death rattle that gives me a 7/7 taunt. So, this I think is like a tough card to evaluate because like clearly the highlight moments are so insane, right? Like the possibilities this has are really insane in terms of like the max value you can get off of it. But I think also just like the baseline level, if you have like a decent number of just like normal taunt minions, also seems like it's actually pretty powerful. My assumption is that this works with anything that gains taunt at any point. Like if you give something like Defender of Argus taunt and it dies, it'll just come back as a normal minion. It's not like a like an Azoth, right, which like checks for things that naturally had death rattle throughout the game. When it ultimately comes back down, but yeah, I think that this is obviously the sort of card that like I don't think this is a card that like is as directly powerful as the discount one, the taunt discount one, because this you have to set up a board where this actually does something, right? Whereas that is the thing that lets you set the board up, and things that require a game state in order to be good versus things that enable powerful game states by existing. Typically, the enabler is the thing that's more likely to always be powerful than the thing that requires, is contingent in its power on that game state being reached. And this is a contingent card. So, I think that there's probably a deck there that includes this guy that ends up being good. But I don't think it's as likely to be like as kind of like potentially deck defining and metagame defining as the taunt discount card. Next up, we have Guff Rune Totem. I guess this is like Hamul Rune Totem's like cousin or nephew or something. 3-cost 2/4. After you cast a nature spell, give another friendly minion +2/+2. This is the sort of thing that like, obviously like spell schools didn't exist before. This is the sort of thing that makes you go back and look like, what's a nature spell? Because this is a really powerful effect that every time you play a something, give another friendly minion +2/+2. It is important to note it is another, so you can't just like play out Guff and play a bunch of nature things. You know, you have to have other stuff in play. But like, you know, a lot of like the token generators, for instance, are nature cards. Like for instance, the turtles that we were just talking about, the turtle generating card. That's a nature card. So you could play Guff into Turtle Maker, and then boom, one of your turtles is a 3/4. There's a lot of, and in particular, yeah, there's a lot of cheap nature spells. Like Nature Studies is a cheap nature spell that potentially gets more nature spells, right? Like a lot of Druid cards are nature. I think Innervate's a nature card, right? Like Lightning Bloom. You know, there's just a lot of things that are really cheap that you can use with this to just like build out a board all of a sudden out of nowhere at like, you know, a really, really low cost. If like, yeah, you can play like imagine this with like Gibberling and a bunch of these ramp cards, right? You're now making minions and buffing them every single time you're playing. You're getting 3/3 worth of stats. Every Innervate is 3/3 worth of stats. That's kind of outrageous. So I definitely expect this card to see play. I think it's going to be a very powerful card in these token style strategies. And it's going to be the sort of thing that you know, gets people looking at, okay, well, what's nature? And I think that's one of the things I really like about the introduction of the spell schools is that, you know, you have a ton of new like ways to evaluate cards you might not necessarily looked at before. It's like, okay, do I play like I'm blanking on what a specific nature spell that doesn't really see play, but like, do I play, you know, this thing because it's specifically a nature spell that I might not otherwise normally play, like, you know, or things like with Nature Studies, right? Do you pick a card off of Nature Studies because it's just another nature spell and you have Guff, right? So there's a lot of, you know, kind of just additional ways that you can care about different parts of cards and different cards because of the introduction of spell schools, and I think this is one of the most powerful versions of that we're going to see. Next up, we have Pride's Fury. 4-cost spell, give your minions +1/+3. I like to think that what's going on here is these lions are like, yeah, this antelope's cool. You're going to join our pride, not we're going to eat you. Worth noting, no spell school. This is not a nature spell coming off of Guff. I think that when you look at this card up front, you're like, oh, this card seems kind of bad. And my gut instinct is that this is not a particularly great card. That said, with the removal of Savage Roar from the core set, I think that things that let your token minions survive kind of feel like they're more valuable. Because previously it would be like, okay, my goal as a token deck is to just make a bunch of tokens and then kill my opponent because my tokens survive for a turn, right? And now with Savage Roar no longer being a part of the core set, your tokens kind of have to do the job, right? If you're making a bunch of stuff, you want to protect your tokens, and not just that they stick around for, you know, a turn with something like a, you know, Soul the Forest, but that, you know, like, okay, I'm going to invest in their future. You know, much like these lions are like, we're going to teach this gazelle to survive, you know, in the rough and tumble world of the Barrens. If you're a gazelle, you got to be out there knowing that, well, some other horrible predator that's not these lions, which are clearly on your side, are someday going to come and try to eat you. And you need to be ready for that. So you got to give yourself +1/+3. But I mean, like, for instance, on the reveal stream, right, like Chalky played Solar Eclipse into Pride's Fury, right, and gave his board +2/+6. And it's like, that is really hard to remove, right? That's like much more powerful than, you know, just giving your board, like, you know, obviously it's way cheaper to give your board +2/+2, but like the ability to keep those around, you know, can make it really, really difficult. And especially if you have like stuff like the you know, either like lifesteal guys or taunt guys, buffing their health is actually pretty valuable, pretty important. So I like, even if this card isn't necessarily super amazing, I like the fact that there's, you know, there's stuff that pushes in the direction of like, well, I care about keeping these alive rather than, you know, for an extended period of time and protecting my board, rather than just like, okay, I'm just going to buff everything and kill you. So, you know, I think at bare minimum, this is the sort of card that like will even if it's not like, you know, regularly run in decks, I can easily see playing like one of this, and I can easily see playing, you know, picking this very frequently off of something like Nature Studies to keep your board around against your opponent's AoE. It is like, you know, kind of expensive, but I think that, you know, like, people really underestimate the value of additional health and how much it matters to get, like, especially a board full of tokens out of range of like your typical AoE. And I think that like how likely this is to see play is really contingent on like the frequency that you see certain types of AoE and what sort of damage breakpoints are important in the metagame. Next up, we have Mark of the Spike Shell, another nature spell, and it buffs. So give a minion +2/+2. If it has taunt, add a copy of it to your hand. So, you know, this is a weird card because typically with like buff effects, like they're best, you're best wanting to play like buff type cards on like smaller stuff, but the copy effect is generally more valuable on larger stuff. Maybe there's like specific, taunt minions that you want like multiple copies of. Maybe there's like, say in that deck, we're discussing the possibility of, like a Greybow deck, right? A Greybow deck with the taunt discount guy, with the Plaguema guy. Maybe you're looking to like make a million Greybows, make a bunch of copies of it. So you're like, okay, I want to play that guy with this, and then the Mark. I mean, this can be like pretty crazy with the taunt discount guy, right? Like you can give you, you're like, okay, well, I'll mark the Spike Shell, and then I can just play another one immediately because it's the 2 discount anyway. I don't know. This is I think a difficult card to evaluate without like thinking more comprehensively about all the taunt minions that are available in the format. But I do think that anytime there's like a buff like this that doesn't cost you a card, like we saw with like say Mark of Yashiraj, right? This is kind of like a Mark of Yashiraj. Obviously, it's like, it doesn't actually draw you a card. It, gives you a copy of specifically that taunt minion. So it's not like cycle through your deck kind of thing, but it is like, a buff that still retains value, that you're not like essentially paying a whole card to get that +2/+2, and has the potential synergies of like, okay, you get multiple copies of specific taunt minions that you might want, like a Greybow or something. So I think this is a like potentially pretty strong card. Not something that's like an auto include in like any deck that has taunts, kind of like Mark of Yashiraj was in any deck that had a significant number of beasts, because it's not quite as like easy to play something with this the copy effect as a card draw effect. But I do think it's definitely something worth considering and experimenting with in those style of decks. And last but not least, the Thick-Hide Kodo. This is just a strong card, right? 4-cost 3/5 taunt, not impressive by itself, but death rattle gain 5 armor. That's pretty impressive for keeping yourself alive. If you're looking to play any kind of ramp druid, taunt druid, any kind of like defensively oriented druid deck, a okay taunt minion that gains 5 armor when it dies is going to buy you a lot of time against aggressive decks, and it's a beast. So there's like kind of we've seen armor synergy stuff, taunt synergy stuff, beast synergy stuff. There's no armor synergy stuff that I can think of in this set, but Druids obviously had it in the past. Kind of use every part of the Kodo, as it were. It's not quite a buffalo, but it's the buffalo of the Barrens. But yeah, so I just think this is a pretty simple but super solid card that is likely to see a lot of play in a variety of different decks. So we saw like Rotten Applebaum, right? Rotten Applebaum saw play in not like a ton of decks, but it was like a decently popular card during its time in Standard. And this is like a cheaper Rotten Applebaum that is armor gain instead of healing, which is generally just a better effect. So, like compared to like Kartut, right? Kartut, again, was a very popular card in a lot of different decks. This is like, 2 mana less for similar-ish stats and almost as much life gain. So definitely just a really solid card. Obviously, the fact that it's Druid specific, will narrow its applications compared to those, but Druid, again, cares about kind of every piece of what this is doing. So I do expect this will see significant play. So anyway, that's Druid. I do feel like the Druid taunt stuff is probably what I'm most excited by. In particular, as I mentioned, the Druid card that stands out the most to me is the taunt cost reduction card. Any kind of cost reduction card, I think, is something that you really, really want to pay attention to, especially when it is as significant as that one. It obviously doesn't have the mech warper effect of like, okay, you get like multiple cost reductions, just play a bunch of stuff for free. But the fact that you can essentially play it for free, like, say on turn 4, you play this guy, you play the taunt reduction thing, and next turn you can play, something huge at a discount is just really, really, really powerful. So that's where I'm likely to start experimenting with Druid, and there's just a lot of cool stuff that I'm interested in trying. Next up, we have Hunter, starting with Piercing Shot. This is Regis Kilbin getting wrecked, it looks like. But 4-cost spell, deal 6 damage to a minion, excess damage hits the enemy hero. So this is pretty interesting for a number of reasons. One, it's actually like a decent removal spell for like a medium-sized minion for Hunter, which is something that the class hasn't had that much of. Frequently you'd have to like, use a deadly shot and hope to hit, or, Hunter's Mark or whatever. And with Hunter's Mark rotating, obviously it's less reliable ways to get through things. But also this can just be a finisher. Worth noting, this is 6 damage to a minion, excess damage hits the enemy hero, not that minion's controller. So this can just be a kill command if you target your own 1 health minion. So if you have like, say, a Wolpertinger, you just piercing shot your Wolpertinger and your opponent takes 5. It's not quite a fireball, because you can't always just go to your opponent's face, and you can never do 6 to your opponent with it exactly. But it can be very, very close to that, as long as you're playing small minions, which you frequently want to do in Hunter anyway. So I think this is just like a pretty solid card. Obviously there's a number of spell synergies and such in Hunter as well. You could use this with the Rick guy. Well, I forget his name. Professor Slate. Give the spell poisonous, so it will always do 5 damage to your opponent, because it only needs 1 to actually kill the minion. So you could like kill a huge minion as well as deal 5 to your opponent's face. Pretty powerful. So yeah. Overall, I think this is just a solid card. Not like, not something that necessarily is like, super, super powerful. But definitely fills a lot of roles that Hunter is interested in, both in the form of getting through your opponent's stuff, as well as getting through your opponent's face. Next up, we have Warsong Wrangler. Battlecry, discover a beast in your deck. Give all copies of it +2/+1. So 4 cost 3/4, pretty mediocre, right? Stat-wise, this is tough. You have to really care about the fact that you are getting the buffed beast, and in particular, you would love to have a something that you particularly cared about the buffs on, like say a Wolpertinger we're just discussing. You use this, get a Wolpertinger, you have 2 3/2s at least, and then obviously additional copies of that will get the buff as well. Also exists at the same time as Dire Frenzy being moved into the core set. So Warsong Wrangler Dire Frenzy deck, you can Dire Frenzy Warsong Wrangler, get a copy that has been Dire Frenzied, it gets an additional +2/+1, and the minions that you Dire Frenzied into your deck get another +2/+1 as well. So a lot of stuff that you can do with this that's kind of fidgety combo-y. The fact that it is always a beast does give you some ability, control over it. You can build your deck such that you only have Wolpertingers and Trampling Rhinos and something else that you're really happy to buff. And then you have Dire Frenzies, so you can like always make sure that you're like Wolpertinger, Dire Frenzy, Warsong Wrangler, and just like setting up all of this like powerful stuff to do that with, and making sure that you're maximizing this effect. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it for sure. I don't think that this is like a card that you just put into a random Hunter deck, but does definitely have potential with the right support cards. Next up, we have Wound Prey. A 1-cost spell, deals 1 damage, summons a 1/1 hyena with rush. I remember when this was on the hunt, and just summoned a 1/1 hound and didn't have rush, so we've moved up in the world. But this is, I think, another card that can go into these potential spell Hunter decks. We've seen the inclusion of Lock and Load in the core set, and there's a number of things that care about Hunter spells that we've seen, and the fact that this can do 1, and then you summon the rush hyena, do another 1. Can work very well with things that care about summoning your beast, attacking with beasts. There's obviously some cards in the set that we'll get to that care about that. And the fact that there's like this alongside, as I was saying, Professor Slate. This is a much more effective removal tool in a lot of matchups than like a lot of the spells that you'd have before. Like Arcane Shot is kind of a weak card on its own. This is like able to like split up against decks that have like multiple small things. Can give you board presence in matchups where like you care more about that than just damage. With again Professor Slate, kill your guy, kill your big guy, kill your small guy. I think there's actually like a lot of potential for those sort of spell decks with the amount of synergy that we're seeing in these both the core set and the expansion that could actually support that archetype pretty significantly. So while this like obviously on its own isn't necessarily something that's super impressive looking, there's definitely quite a bit of support that cares about the fact that you specifically have these cheap spells. Next up, we have Pack Kodo. 3 cost 3/3 with Battlecry. Discover a beast, secret, or weapon. It's just like a solid value card. Typically, we don't really see a lot of card generation in Hunter. We saw like Hunter's Pack before. One of the big problems with Hunter's Pack was always that like it was just pure tempo negative. You didn't get anything on the board from it in a class that really cares about playing to the board. This obviously doesn't generate as much value, but like one of the cards that you get is automatically a 3/3 for 3, and it's a beast. So, while there's no more kill command in standard, it's just a very, very decently statted minion. Like obviously 3/3 for 3 is nothing incredible, but it's fine, and you get a range of stuff that can all be pretty effective. If you're looking for some sort of something for the board, you got a beast. If you're looking for something to help try and protect yourself, you can potentially find the right secret. And then there's actually like with Gladiator's Longbow gone, as well as Eaglehorn Bow, there's not that many weapons that you could potentially discover, and one of them is Rinling's Rifle, and Rinling's Rifle is extremely powerful and would also curve directly into it from the Pack Kodo on turn 3. So I think this is just like a really, really solid card in general. And actually expect this to see quite a bit of play. Next up is Tame Beast. As someone who played a hunter in World of Warcraft, I did appreciate going and trying to tame all the various beasts of the world. I believe that the pet that I had for pretty much my entire time as a hunter, for the vast majority of it at least, was it was the White Tiger from the quest in Stranglethorn Vale, the end of like the Big Game Hunter series. That was King Bangalash. That was Fury. It was my White Tiger, Fury. But here you're going around taming like crabs. And then I think ultimately you tame like a Thunder Lizard at rank 3. But it's a 2/2, 4/4, 6/6 beast with Rush for 2, 5, and 10 mana. So all those are actually like okay. Obviously the early rank is, not great, but like oftentimes, as like a hunter, you don't necessarily have that many things that like give you great ability to interact directly with your opponent's stuff early turns. And, there are obviously like synergistic stuff with both rush minions as well as with beasts that you can care about, both sort of pieces of the synergy here. And it's a spell. So it's a spell that generates something on the board, that kind of fits all of these sort of synergies that you possibly want from what Hunter is doing in the current sort of card set in the environment. So I think this is a card that like is kind of innocuous looking, but I think has the potential to be quite strong. Next up, we have Prospectors Caravan, a 2 cost 1/3. At the start of your turn, give all minions in your hand +1/+1. This is sort of strange to me as a hunter card. And I think part of that is because the what was it, the Grime Street dude who like gave him the +1/+1 at the end of your turn was a Paladin card back in Grime Street Enforcer, I think it was. And there's not like obviously like hunters, you care about your stuff being bigger because it does more damage, but there's not like like that many like charge minions that you're like buffing up. There are a decent number of rush minions, right, that you can be buffing with this to get like immediate value off of it. But it feels like Hunter doesn't necessarily have great ways to like protect this compared to a lot of other classes. But this is obviously, it is a very powerful effect, right? Starting to get +1/+1 each turn. If you like in a lot of matchups, like if you say you like played this on turn 2 or coined it out in turn 1, everyone doesn't deal with it right away. It can be really, really powerful. It is, of course, it's a 1/3 for 2, right? This is like old Voracious Reader stat line. But unlike Voracious Reader, you didn't have to play the rest of your hand to get value out of it. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. You want to have this, with a full hand. And, the fact that Hunter doesn't really have that much card draw, you can't really like, in the fact that again, it's the start of your turn rather than end of your turn, feels like it's a difficult card to really figure out a way to necessarily get great advantages off of. And like hunters frequently, in a lot of matchups will end up behind on board against like something like say a zoo deck, right? Like say, is like this is a card in your hand and your opponent plays like a Flame Imp. You're like, oh, I'm dead. So I don't know. I feel like maybe this is something that in the right environment where there's not a lot of aggressive decks that get in the board faster than you can use this to like, try to outvalue control, force them to spend removal early on this, or else face a bunch of buff stuff from your hand. It does feel like it's just pretty difficult to take advantage of, given the overall just kind of stuff that Hunter typically does. But if it does stay in play for like 1 turn, it's pretty powerful, and for 2 turns, it's crazy. So definitely worth like looking at, but I doubt it's going to really be all that impactful. Next up, we have Cotobane, 5 cost 3/5. Battlecry, draw a 1, 2, and 3 cost spell. This is like a Ringmaster Watley, but instead of getting it's like literally the same cost and stat line, but instead of getting a dragon, a mech, and a pirate, you get a 1, 2, and 3 cost spell. I mean, draw 3. For a 5 cost 3/5 is actually like pretty good, right? And if you are playing, a deck that cares about like playing out a bunch of cheap spells, like whether you're playing like Slate or you're playing Lock and Load or you're playing both, this is definitely something that like Hunter struggles with is card draw, right? And one of the things that a class that struggles with card draw can struggle with is piecing synergies together because you don't necessarily have like the ability to actually find every piece of the puzzle that you're trying to actually put together. And this is a very important card for this kind of thing. So I think this is like likely to be a card that will be a solid choice in either like in Spell Hunter style decks. Potentially in just like, maybe there's like mid-range-ish Spell Hunter that aren't like kind of these combo-ish Spell Hunter, and this is just a good card in those. If you do have just like a bunch of 1, 2, and 3 cost spells in your deck, this is just a good card to put in your deck because it's just like, pretty high value and a decent body on the board. But like what are the, the 3 cost spells that you're playing with Hunter with Kill Command, Animal Companion gone? There's not that many that really stand out as being that appealing to me. So part of it is, where are you kind of, what are you kind of using to fill the roles this is asking you to find? Now this is a cool card. Tavish Stormpike. After friendly beast attacks, summon a beast from your deck that costs 1 less. So talking about like things that have synergy with rush minions, right? This is obviously something that's really good with rush minions. You rush out something from like a Tame Beast, right? Say on turn 5, you can play Tavish, you can play Tame Beast. I don't know what the 4/4 rush minion costs, but you immediately get to attack and summon another rush minion. You can use this on turn 10, right? You play your Tame Beast, summon another beast out of your deck. You can do this without rush minion. You just keep a beast in play, right? It just feels like this is just a very, very powerful card, especially of course with a bunch of rush minions. There is no more Tundra Rhino, at least in the core set. So you can't go like Tavish into Tundra Rhino into like play something attack. But, the fact that this does work with the rush minions that come out with Tame Beast that you can use immediately alongside this, I'm being told that the minions essentially have a cost equal to their stats. So the 4/4 rush off of Tame Beast is a 4 cost. You can attack with that and immediately get a 3 cost, which, that could be, say, another rush minion, or it could just be like a jungle panther, right, that your opponent can't answer, and then okay, well, now you're getting the damage in. So I just think this is just generally a solid card. Obviously leans toward beast synergy, and there's the other legendary which leans toward the spell synergy. So I'm kind of curious to see both of those different things play out. And again, the fact that like if your opponent just doesn't kill your thing on board, you immediately get value out of it by playing Tavish and attacking, and there's a synergy with stuff like rush minions, Tame Beast, etc., to give you immediate value, just played alongside it, is part of what makes this feel like it's just such a powerful card. Hunter does sometimes struggle with value generation, with running out of resources because it is not a class that typically has that much in the way of card draw. And this is a way that not only are you getting card draw, but you're getting immediate board presence as well, and that can be a really, really, really big deal. Next up, we have Sunscale Raptor, 1 cost 1/3 beast. With Frenzy, shuffle a Sunscale Raptor into your deck with a permanent +2/+1. I feel like this is basically just building up to a Sunscale Raptor plus Dire Frenzy plus Wrangler, and you just have like 1 cost like 30/30s, right? You just keep trying to make bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger Raptors by just getting them out there, getting them buffed by Frenzy, getting them buffed by the Wrangler, getting them buffed by the Frenzy ability, getting everything. It's Frenzy and Dire Frenzy. They even clearly are telling you they want to work well together. But yeah, I mean, this is like a 1/3 beast for 1 like Dire Mole. Obviously, in a particular metagame, Dire Mole saw play, right? This is a Dire Mole that has a powerful ability, especially in combination with other things that can discover those beasts in your deck and give you the additional buffs and things like that. Obviously, this can also work with stuff like Aug Merchants, right? You wanna just like enable it with for yourself right away. If you have like ways to give your own minions rush or anything like that, can be really powerful. So yeah, I think this is just an interesting card, and I look forward to there being like an achievement to have like a 20 power Raptor or something, because I want to work toward that. And last but not least for Hunter is Kolkar Pack Runner. 2 cost 2/3, which is, okay stat line to begin with. After you cast a spell, summon a 1/1 hyena with Rush. So, obviously, we're not in the Rokdalar world where we care about having a deck with no minions in it. So this is just like a pretty strong payoff for a Spell Hunter deck. You just cast some spells and just make a bunch of additional stuff. I think this is just clearly a pretty cool card that with a potentially strong payoff for just casting a bunch of cheap spells. You play this alongside your tracking with its new change. No one will be like, oh my god, I won't tracking away my good cards. You just use it, boom. Discover a card, get a hyena. Discover a card, get a hyena. Tracking into on the hunt, whatever it's called. I forget the name of the new on the hunt, but this just a absolutely decent minion that you can use in those style of decks that gives you a little bit of extra value. But yeah, anyway, that is the last Hunter card we have. Overall, I like the sort of directions that Hunter has going. There's the beast stuff and the spell stuff. I feel like most of it. And also I do appreciate the fact that there's a decent amount of value generation for Hunter. Hunter, as I was saying, it historically has struggled for the fact that it doesn't really have meaningful card draw. But between the stuff like the Pack Kodo with the Discover effect, the Wrangler with the Discover plus buff effect, especially alongside stuff like the Raptors and Dire Frenzies and such, gives you kind of a interesting feel to being able to play a longer game as Hunter, while not necessarily drawing a bunch of cards, but having more access to stuff in your deck than the average class does, as well as getting rewarded for doing so with things that further boost the future versions of those, like the Wrangler and the Dire Frenzy, and of course the Scale Raptor, which I will be aiming for that achievement to have giant raptors.